Welcome back to another video, guys. Today we are going to be talking about arguably the most popular performance boosting supplement. And surprise, you might already be taking it. This supplement increases our exercise capacity, it reduces pain, it increases the activation of our central nervous system, and it helps us work out for longer than we would have without it. Do you know what it is? Drum roll, please. It is caffeine. Yep, the humble cup of joe that you have in the morning. I've just thought about that phrase. Why is Joe in a cup? What does that even mean? Caffeine could potentially be a really powerful performance enhancer. We're going to talk about how big the effect of caffeine is. We're going to talk about how much we should have and potentially some issues with it. Now, caffeine is the most widely consumed psychoactive stimulant globally. It's an integral part of so many different cultures. And this is an older graph, but it highlights the different consumption across different countries. And even though so many people already consume it, fitness influencers have convinced us that we need to take pre-workouts or special things like that in order to get that performance boost. But do we really need to be spending our money on something else when a lot of us have caffeine already every day? And the answer is maybe not, because caffeine has been shown to increase our endurance performance by pretty significantly increasing our time to exhaustion. So it takes longer for us to get tired. In anaerobic and strength and power performance, there is less data, but there is still some. And that data shows that caffeine can increase the velocity of swimming, it can increase power output, increase time to fatigue, and marginally increase our maximal voluntary contractions. One meta-analysis showed that caffeine consumption overall, across all of the sports, improved performance by 12.3%. That is a huge increase, particularly when you think about the Olympics. If you want to increase your chances of medaling or earning a medal spot, you only have to increase your performance by 0.5% to 1%. Like, they're such small margins. And now we're finding out that caffeine could increase that performance by 12%. Although that may not be with athletes, so take that with a grain of salt. And one of those grains of salt was that performance was that the performance increase was more present during endurance performance or the time to exhaustion tasks. So if you're an endurance athlete or you just love long bouts of cardio, I'm jealous, but that looks pretty good for you. For anaerobic activities like sprinting, jumping, and throwing, there are some literature to show that there are small to moderate benefits from the ingestion of caffeine on your performance, but those benefits aren't consistently shown across every study. And so for that reason, generally speaking, it seems to be aerobic endurance that benefits more prominently from caffeine. Now, what's really important to mention as we go through this, we've just kind of seen that it differs between sport and sport, but the magnitude of caffeine's effect is really individual. It's going to depend on your genetics, your metabolism, your anxiety levels, whether or not you're on a medication. It's going to depend on your current level of training and when you take it. So for example, I might have 1 cup of coffee in the morning and be bouncing off the walls because I also take a stimulant medication. But you might have 1 cup and be like, yeah, I need 5 more to function. Thank you. As for the specific amount of caffeine that we might need to increase our exercise performance, the range of 3 to 6 milligrams per kilo of body mass has been consistently shown to have a positive impact. You could potentially even have slightly lower doses than that, with the minimally effective dose of caffeine intake being at around 2 milligrams per kilo of body mass. On the other side of things, the other end of that spectrum, we have really high doses of caffeine, and that's around that 9 milligram per kilo of body mass. But those high doses, that's where we see the higher incidences of side effects. And at those levels, we don't generally see any additional performance benefits. So it's kind of like the law of diminishing returns, right? Is that right? Like, the more caffeine you take and this is your performance, but then the performance might plateau, but your caffeine intake might go up. At that higher range, there's not really any additional benefit. Now, bear with me for a second while I do some calculations, because I was reading this and I was like, that seems to be like a lot of caffeine, a lot of coffee. So let's use me, for example. I think I range between like 70 to 75 kilos of body mass. So if we start first at the lower end of that range, 3 to 6, 3 by 75 would mean about 225 milligrams of caffeine. And that's what it would take for me to potentially see an increase in my performance. If there's roughly about 100 milligrams in a cup of coffee, could be more, could be less, that would take me about 2 cups of coffee to get that increase. But on the other end, at the higher end, we've got 6 milligrams per kilo kilo of body mass, that would be around 450 milligrams of caffeine. And that's potentially 4 or more cups of coffee. And even though that could help me performance-wise, I don't think that I would be feeling my best after that. Like, I'd be agitated, I'd be anxious, I think I would have headaches. Not to mention, I feel like I'd be kind of bloated and uncomfortable from just having that much liquid. And that is, I think, why energy drinks were created. Because you can see here in caffeine content how they compare. They're much higher for the same amount of actual volume. Some caffeine shots that I've seen around the rugby players, they're around 200 milligrams of caffeine in just 50 milliliters of liquid. I know a few athletes who have a few of those per rugby match, but they shall remain nameless. Much like anything ergogenic or performance enhancing, there are potential side effects. And those side effects may be present for you, they might not, but it is worth being aware of them, particularly if you're somebody who likes to consume a large amount of caffeine. Like, caffeine overdoses from things like energy drinks are rare, but they are seen. And those overdoses are rarely seen with coffee and tea because the amount of liquid that you would have to consume to that caffeine ratio is way off, right? But on a more serious note, and I am going to put a trigger warning here for those of us who are more sensitive to discussions about severe mental health issues, but energy drink consumption can lead to irritability, anxiousness, depressive moods, and it can also lead to suicidal ideation, plans, and attempts in a pediatric population. And that is terrifying. And I'm not saying all of this to scare you, but what I am saying is that if you choose to use energy drinks or high amounts of caffeine to improve your performance, this is something that we really need to be aware of and we need to be monitoring within ourselves. As for the other organs, if we move away from our brain, you can see here that with energy drinks and that high caffeine content, we see things like heart issues, GI issues, we see insomnia. So imagine if you had your competition in the evening or you went to the gym in the evening and you had a pre-workout, which is around 150 to 300 milligrams of caffeine. You probably might perform better in the gym, but you might not sleep nearly as well, which means you're not recovering appropriately, and that could affect your training for performance or for life the next day too. So with everything, we really do need to weigh up our caffeine intake on that kind of cost to benefit scale. Like, maybe it's worth only having caffeine to support your performance during really heavy gym days or during a really important competition. If you go to the gym or train every single day, maybe it's not worth it to have caffeine every single session. That's something that you need to weigh up within yourself. And just as a side note, I remember one of my friends who's an S&C coach telling me and telling Callum that there was this study in the UK where they were looking at the effects of caffeine intake and they accidentally gave the students the wrong amount of caffeine. They gave them the equivalent of 300 cups of coffee. So these students were sent to hospital. I think they survived, and the university was fined like £400,000 or something, as they should have been for putting people's lives at risk. But where I'm going with that is, obviously, generally speaking, you or I aren't going to be consuming 300 cups of coffee. I mean, I don't think. But even so, it is worth remembering that caffeine can have really severe side effects. And even though that comes with the potential performance benefit, those side effects are there. But caffeine is not a banned substance in sport. It used to be a banned substance, but not anymore. Caffeine is a monitored substance though. So that means that athletes are generally encouraged to keep their intake below that higher end. We want them below the 9 to 10 milligrams per kilo of body mass. And it's because at this range of caffeine intake, it starts to really heavily show up in your urine. Around that 9 milligram level is where it shows up in about 12 micrograms per milliliter of your urine. And I only mention that because in the NCAA, or the National Collegiate Athletics Association, caffeine is a banned substance if it shows up at levels of 15 micrograms per milliliter of your urine. I know, again, not everybody's going to be drinking this much coffee or consuming this much caffeine, because in order to reach that level of intake, you'd have to be having 3 times the amount that is generally considered to improve your performance. So at that point, it's not really serving you any additional benefit to have that amount of caffeine. It's not really in your best interest. And it is worth keeping that in mind, the fact that you potentially could be consuming a lot of caffeine. Because if you have a pre-workout, you have a coffee in the morning, maybe you have a coffee in the afternoon, you have a couple of cups of tea, like all of that caffeine can build up when really it might not be worth it for you to consume anywhere near that amount. And it is going to depend on what sport you play, what activities you like doing. So to finish up, I thought that we could all look at this quick little list of how caffeine intake affects different sports and the potential performance enhancing effects that it could have. But as you look at this, I do want you to remember that caffeine caffeine's effect is really individual. And like I said earlier, you do have to weigh up within yourself whether the potential side effects are worth it. And if you choose not to have coffee, that's okay too. Maybe it's something special that you can have sometimes when you just want to bounce off the walls and go all out. And I know, like I said in the beginning, that coffee is such a big part of our culture and stuff as well. Like, I grew up a little bit in Australia and freaking cafes are everywhere. That is a part of that country, is the cafe and coffee culture. I'm half Italian. I know that after dinner, little espresso shots were given out, and it's a way for people to bond and to communicate. I know that in the morning for me, I love to sit and read and have a cup of coffee. That is how I like to start my day. I don't even know if I'm really having it for energy or if it's just habit. I just like the taste. Like, there's so many reasons to drink coffee or to consume caffeine, and I'm well aware of that. I just wanted to point all of this out to you to make sure you're aware of potential side effects that could come up and you're making an informed decision based on all of that and based on what is best for you. Because I also know, for me at least, if I have too much caffeine, I do get really anxious and I have a tendency to spiral and think that things are wrong with me, or I might crash after I have that coffee and feel really low. Knowing that all of that is normal and knowing that those symptoms and side effects are actually quite common, that's allowed me to cut back on my coffee intake and manage those feelings a little bit better. That's kind of less sciencey, that's more anecdotal, obviously. If you're interested, some of the papers that I've linked down below explore and explain the mechanisms behind why caffeine works as a performance enhancement for us. I just didn't want to mention it right now because I wasn't sure how many of us would be interested in it, but if you are, then it's down there, and I really recommend that you have a read because it's quite cool to find out, right? But no matter what you choose, I hope that it is the right decision for you based on what you need and what you want, because you know your body best, and I hope you treat yourself with the love and the kindness that you deserve. That's it for me, guys. I put out new videos every Wednesday and Saturday. I hope you have a wonderful week ahead, and I will see you all very soon. I'm gonna go get a coffee. Bye, everybody.